The wine was still cold when my mother looked at me across the Christmas table, smiled her best smile, and told everyone she'd finally sold the old farmhouse. "Closed last month," she said. "Good price too. Some investment company came in and paid well over asking." My sister raised her glass. My uncle nodded. My father stared at his plate. I looked at my mother and I said, "Cedar Hollow Holdings?" She blinked. "Yes, actually. How did you know that?" I reached into my purse. I said, "Because I'm Cedar Hollow Holdings." The room went so quiet you could hear the candles. That moment took 9 months to build. It cost me every dollar I had saved since I was 22 years old, 3 conversations with a lawyer, 1 forged will, 1 tin recipe box, and 1 letter from a dead woman who knew exactly what her family was going to do before she closed her eyes. This is how it happened. My grandmother Ruth was a farmer's widow who kept her own accounts, grew her own tomatoes, and never once said anything she didn't mean. She had a farmhouse on 12 acres outside of a small town called Clover Creek, and she had 4 people who called themselves her family: my mother Diane, my father, my sister Penny, and me. I was the one who showed up. Not because I was told to, not because I expected anything from it. I showed up because Ruth was 81, and her hands had started shaking, and someone needed to sort her prescriptions, and drive her to the cardiologist, and sit on her porch on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee that was too strong, and saying very little, which was exactly the kind of company she preferred. My mother came at Easter. Penny came when she felt like it. My father came when my mother made him. I came every week for 7 years. Ruth never made a big thing of it. That wasn't her way. But once, in her garden with dirt under both our nails, she looked at me sideways and said something I filed away without knowing why. "The ones who plant the seeds are the ones who get to eat the tomatoes." She said it flat, like a weather forecast. Then she went back to her weeding. I thought she was just talking about tomatoes. She was not talking about tomatoes. If you've ever been the one in your family who showed up quietly and got passed over loudly, stay right here, because this story goes exactly where you think it's going, and then somewhere you didn't expect. Subscribe so you catch every story on this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, the call that started everything. Ruth fell in late January. Not a bad fall. She got back up, but it shook her. She called me, not my mother, not Penny, me. I drove out on a Tuesday morning to find her sitting in her kitchen looking smaller than she ever had, with a sealed envelope on the table and her lawyer's business card sitting on top of it. Her attorney's name was Patricia Owens. She had an office in the county seat. Ruth told me she'd been there 2 weeks earlier to get her affairs sorted. She did not tell me what was in the envelope. She told me it wasn't time yet. What she did give me was a key. Small, plain, brass. The kind that opens a lockbox or a safe deposit drawer. She pressed it into my hand and said, "When it's time, you'll know what this is for." I asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine and asked me to make more coffee. 3 months later, she died in her sleep. And 2 months after that, I was sitting at a folding table in my cousin Marty's living room, listening to a will get read that didn't sound anything like the woman I had known for 34 years. Marty was a notary. That detail matters. He spread the papers out with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this. My mother sat across from me in her good black blazer, already dabbing her eyes with a tissue, which was impressive since the reading hadn't started yet. Ruth's estate, the house, the land, the accounts, all of it left to my mother Diane. The document named her as the devoted daughter who provided comfort in my final years. My name was not in it. Not as a recipient, not as a witness, not as a footnote. I sat and read the will 3 times, while everyone else murmured warmly, and my sister put her hand on our mother's arm. Something was wrong with the signature. I knew Ruth's handwriting. I'd watched her sign tax forms for 7 years. The signature on this document was too clean, too controlled. Nothing like a woman whose hands had been shaking since the previous spring. And the date, 6 weeks before her death, when she had not left the house in 3 months, and Marty had most certainly not visited. I said nothing. I thanked Marty for his time. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table, and I wrote everything down in a list. Dates, facts, things I knew, things I could prove, things that didn't line up, because lists are how I think when I'm too angry to speak. Then I called Patricia Owens. She picked up before the second ring. When I said Ruth's name, she asked me to come in. The next morning, I drove to the county seat and sat across from a woman in her 60s, with careful eyes and a very still face. She opened a folder. Inside it was a will, 2 years old, properly signed and witnessed, sealed by her office. It left the farmhouse and 12 acres to me. Not my mother, not split evenly. To me, with a line in the body of the document that said, "To my granddaughter Claire, who was present when it mattered." I had to look at the window for a moment. Patricia told me the rest plainly. Nobody had contacted her about a change or a revocation. A second valid will could supersede hers, but it had to be genuinely valid. The one Marty had read was not, in her professional opinion, genuine. She said the original signed copy was in a safe deposit box at Clover Creek Bank, and she looked at me and asked if Ruth had given me anything, by any chance, before she passed. I reached into my coat pocket. I set the brass key on her desk. Patricia looked at it for a long moment and then said, "We have work to do." Here is the problem. The legal fight to prove fraud takes time. Months, sometimes over a year, while lawyers file and courts review, and families argue. And the probate on my grandmother's house was already moving fast. My mother had petitioned as executor, and the estate sale was set. The farmhouse was going to auction in 8 weeks. I could fight the will in court and probably win, eventually, after the house had already sold to a stranger. Or, I could buy it myself. I want to tell you the moment I decided. I was parked on the gravel road outside Ruth's house one evening, engine off, watching the light go flat behind her roof. Her porch swing was still there. Her garden had gone to weeds, but the stakes were still in the ground where she'd tied up her beans last summer. I thought about someone tearing those stakes out. I drove home and opened my laptop, and I started doing math. The house had been appraised at a number that was large to me, and probably not large to a developer. My savings were enough to anchor a bid. I qualified for a small business loan to cover the rest. I had a clean record, a 7-year-old bookkeeping firm, and enough grim focus to stay inside a number without flinching. But there was one problem: my name. If Diane saw my name on the auction paperwork, she would outbid me out of spite. Or she would delay the sale, or she would find some way to make noise about it, because that was what she did with problems she couldn't buy. She made noise until someone else paid the cost. So I did something that sounds complicated, but is completely standard. I formed a company. A small LLC registered under a name she wouldn't recognize, Clover Ridge Properties. On paper, it would look like an outside buyer, some anonymous investment group from nowhere particular. On the Federal Registry, I listed myself as the true beneficial owner, because I follow rules. But the auction listing would just show a company name. My mother would never connect it to the daughter she'd written off. I got the paperwork filed on a Thursday. The auction was in 6 weeks. Then I waited. Waiting is harder than planning. While I was waiting, my sister Penny called. She'd bought a new car, something large and expensive. She laughed about it on the phone, breezy and warm, the way she always was when she was showing off without meaning to. She said, "You know, Grandma, she'd have wanted us to actually enjoy it." I said, She said, "Honestly, Claire, don't feel bad about the will thing. You know how Grandma was. She never thought about fairness." I held the phone and thought about 7 years of Sunday mornings and shaking hands and prescription bottles, and I said, "You're probably right, Penny." She said she'd see me at Christmas. She had no idea she was buying that car with money she was going to have to give back. The safe deposit box was exactly what Patricia had said it would be. We opened it together on a Wednesday morning. Inside, the executed original will, Patricia's seal in the corner, the signatures of 2 witnesses from her office, and a sealed envelope with my name on the front. I stood in the bank's small back room and stared at that envelope for longer than I should have. Ruth's handwriting on the outside, just my name, nothing else. Patricia stepped out to give me a minute. I opened it. She wrote the way she talked. Short sentences, no softness around the edges. She told me she'd seen the shape of what would happen. She'd watched Diane for 30 years, she said, and she knew exactly what a house and 12 acres would look like to a woman who'd been spending ahead of herself for years. She told me about the real will. She told me where the key went. She told me Patricia's name. And then the last line, which I have folded and unfolded enough times that the crease is going soft. Do not raise your voice, Claire. You were never any good at it. Set the papers down and let the truth do the talking. The house belongs to the one who was there. That was always you. I folded the letter. I put it in my bag. Then I walked out and told Patricia we were ready to proceed on both fronts, the fraud case and the auction. The auction was on a grey Tuesday morning. I didn't go in. I sent a colleague from Patricia's office, a calm man named Frank who wore a good coat and had a hard number written on a card in his breast pocket. My limit, the most I could spend and still sleep. I sat in my car in the lot outside and watched people go in. My mother went in wearing her good coat, Penny beside her, both of them looking like they were attending something they'd already won. She walked right past my car. I had my phone on the seat, and Frank was texting me updates. Bidding opened low. It climbed. A local farmer. A developer from the city. Frank, quiet and patient in his good coat, raising the paddle without expression. The price passed my target number. I texted Frank, hold the limit. It passed 200,000. 220. Then at 231,000, the room paused. Frank texted, gavel's coming down. Then, sold to Clover Ridge Properties. I sat in that cold car with my hand over my mouth, and I made a sound that was not crying exactly, but was close enough. My mother walked out of the building 10 minutes later, beaming. She stopped on the steps to say something to Penny, probably about the price, probably pleased at how well it had gone. She was counting the money in her head. She was standing 40 feet from the person who had just paid it. She never looked over. She called to invite me to Christmas 2 weeks later. Sweet as anything. Warm and gracious and eager in the way she only got when she was nervous about something. I'd heard through a neighbor that a company had been requesting estate documents from the county. My mother had no way of knowing who that was, but she was the kind of person who rings the bell before a problem knocks. She said, let's put all this sadness behind us. It's Christmas. Then she said, and let's not have any drama about the house. You understand it was never going to be yours. I held the phone. I said, I'll be there. What should I bring? She said, just yourself. I said, of course. In my bag the morning of Christmas, I had 3 things. The deed, in the name of Clover Ridge Properties, the original will, Patricia's seal in the corner, my name in the body, and Ruth's letter, the one that smelled faintly like her kitchen. 3 pieces of paper. I drove across town to my parents' house in the cold and parked behind my sister's enormous new car, the one bought with money I had paid, and I sat for one breath with my hands on the wheel. Then I picked up my bag. Then I went inside. The table was set the way my mother set it when she wanted to be admired. Good china, candles, a centerpiece that cost more than it should have. Marty was there, near the far end of the table, which was funny, a man who'd built a fraud on a folding table, now sitting at someone else's Christmas dinner, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. I was seated at my mother's right hand, the place of honor, so everyone could see how graciously she was treating the daughter who had nothing to be angry about. I passed the rolls. I asked my uncle about his knee. I poured my own water. We ate. After the main course, my mother tapped her glass. She stood. She said it had been a hard year, losing Ruth, but they'd gotten through it as a family. She said the house had finally sold. She said it was time to move forward. Then her eyes found me, and the smile changed. I know that was disappointing for some of us, she said, looking right at me. But there's no shame in it, sweetheart. Grandma made her wishes clear. Penny lifted her glass. She said, honestly, it's better this way. You'd have just let it sit there. Travis murmured her name. Penny laughed and said, what? It's true. Marty reached for his water and knocked it with the back of his hand. I set my fork down. I looked at my mother. I said, can I ask who bought the house? She blinked, set her glass down, said some company. Clover Ridge Properties. Why? I said, I want to make sure I have the right name. She said, yes, that's the one. Why? I reached into my bag. I set the deed on the table first, turned so she could read it. She looked at it like it was in a language she almost recognized. Then her eyes caught the company name. I set the will down beside it. I heard Penny make a sound. I set the letter down last, and I rested my hand flat on it, and I looked at my mother across the Christmas table, and I said, "Ruth left the house to me. She left it to me 2 years ago, in a real will, signed properly with a real lawyer, and then she left me a letter telling me exactly what you were going to do. So when your auction came up, I formed a company, and I was the one who bid on it. The money you all spent this fall came from me. You sold my grandmother's house back to me, and you didn't know." The candles burned. Marty's chair scraped the floor. My mother's mouth opened and no sound came out. Then sound came out, and it was loud, and it was angry, and it was directed at Marty, who was already standing, who was already saying he had nothing to do with any of this, backing toward the hallway in his Christmas sweater. I didn't raise my voice. But I just kept my hand on Ruth's letter, and I waited. Because you don't argue with papers, you just set them on the table, and let people realize what they're looking at. My mother looked at the deed. She looked at the will. She looked at the letter. She looked at me. I said, "I hope the cash was useful while it lasted." Then I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, thanked her for the food, which had been genuinely good, picked up my bag, and walked out. Behind me, I heard my sister saying something in a high, tight voice about the car. I closed the front door behind me. Patricia filed the petition to reopen probate 2 days after Christmas. Marty, facing a notary commission review, and something considerably worse than that, stopped holding his story together, almost immediately. The document he'd notarized fell apart under the first real scrutiny. The witness names led nowhere, the signature didn't survive handwriting analysis, and Marty himself provided most of the case for the prosecution, simply by panicking in an obvious direction. The estate was reopened under Ruth's real will. The money my family had divided from the auction, the money they'd spent on debts and cars and vacations, was ordered returned to the estate, which was now mine. My mother had spent hers already. That became her problem, not mine. My sister sold the car. My father, who I believe knew some of what had happened and chose not to know more of it, sent me a letter in February. 3 sentences. He was sorry. He hadn't asked the right questions. He didn't expect anything. I wrote back 2 sentences. I know. The door is open. He came in April. He sat at Ruth's kitchen table, my kitchen table now, and drank coffee that was too strong, and said very little, and looked out the window at the garden coming back. It wasn't enough to fix anything, but it was something. The porch swing still hangs crooked. I haven't fixed it. I don't plan to. Mr. Haddad, who farmed beside Ruth for 40 years, brought me tomato starts in May without being asked. He didn't say much. He handed me the flat and looked at the house for a long moment and then walked back to his truck. That was its own kind of blessing. Here is what I want to leave you with, because this story isn't really about a will or an auction or a company formed in a lawyer's office. It's about this. The people who are actually present never need to be loud about it. The record speaks for itself. 7 years of Tuesday mornings. 7 years of prescriptions sorted and forms filed, and coffee drunk on a porch that always smelled like wood smoke and something growing. Ruth knew what that was worth. She planned for the fact that other people wouldn't, and when the time came, she handed me a key. I knew what it was for. If you made it here with me, you already know what kind of stories this channel is built for. The quiet ones. The ones where nobody screams, and nobody has to, where the truth just gets set on the table and given time to land. If that's where you want to be, subscribe. You'll never miss one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one who stayed? I want to hear it.